the effort, he lost his balance and became nervous, and then fell right on her. He closed his eyes, thinking that he slipped, and seeing the scale in his hand, he happily exclaimed that he succeeded. Hydra, lying under him, said with a smile that he was good. But isn't he too greedy? She didn't think that he had his eye on her as well. She looked away embarrassedly and told him to do what he wanted, and he abruptly stood up and began waving his arms, shouting that it was just a misunderstanding. At that moment, Chiron appeared. Seeing them, he sighed heavily and said that he couldn't believe it. Hajuin turned around and the centaur exclaimed, "Did he defeat the Hydra itself?" From Chiron's side, it looked like Hajuin had knocked the Hydra to the ground in a fight. MC turned around and asked what he was doing here, and Lucio, sitting on the centaur's back, happily called out to him, then hugged his hand and exclaimed that it was so good that he was alive. He was surprised to say her name, and said that it was dangerous here. He told her to stand outside. She replied that he didn't listen to her either. He smirked and said that she was still loyal, then began to stretch her cheeks, and she screamed that it hurt. Chiron was still in shock at this time. He thought, did this man really defeat the Hydra? Even Hercules had a hard time dealing with her. This Hephaestus sent a real monster. Meanwhile, Hydra stood up and began to watch them, and Hajuin, noticing her gaze, turned to her and worriedly apologized, asking, "Are they too noisy?" She smiled and replied that it was not so. "By the way, is this his nymph?" He replied that she was not his, it was just a little girl from the neighboring house. Lucio exclaimed with displeasure that someone like her was considered the most elite among the nymphs. But before she could finish speaking, he closed her mouth, and Hydra smiled and said that it was so unusual. She looked away and told Chiron that they had not seen each other for a long time. And he had aged a lot. Does time really not spare even immortals? She looked down at his wounded leg and asked, or did her poison affect him? MC was surprised and asked what happened between them, and Lucio raised a displeased look at him and said that she was no longer surprised by his ignorance. He got angry and started threatening her with his fists, and she said that it was a well-known story. Chiron's face darkened and she said that this story involved Hercules, the poison arrow of the Hydra, and also the death of Chiron. It was an accident. Chiron remembered how he lay in the middle of the battlefield next to his dead comrades, and tried to pull the poisoned arrow out of his leg, but suddenly he saw Hercules in front of him. This was retribution for raising a monster. After he recovered from this fight, he came to Zeus. Sitting on the throne, he asked if he was asking to take away the immortality that he had granted him. The centaur, kneeling before his throne, asked him to do so and, showing his leg, said that he could no longer endure this torment. Zeus agreed and, stretching out his hand to him, said that considering that he had raised so many heroes, he would give him a constellation. Chiron was very surprised and exclaimed, "What is he talking about?" Zeus replied that he cannot die, then he will understand everything. The centaur was overwhelmed by divine radiance, and he called out to Zeus. Thus ended his life as a sage, and he became a deity who ruled the constellation Sagittarius. He became the constellation Chiron. Hydra said that her poison kills all living things, and he, who is infected with this poison, was able to get to this place. Surely he holds on thanks to the power of the constellation. He said with displeasure that she still has the same nasty snake tongue. She wants him to cut that off too. She laughed and said that he has such a nasty tongue, and before he was such a gentle man. She turned to Hajuin and asked his name, and after he confirmed it, she climbed her hand into her cleavage, from which they froze in shock. Coming to her senses, Lucio immediately turned to Hajuin and covered his eyes, telling him not to look at her. Does he want age restrictions? Hydra pulled out a vial of liquid from under her dress and asked if he needed her saliva as Chiron requested. After her words, the centaur became nervous, and MC asked if she knew everything from the beginning. She replied that he smelled like Chiron, after which she turned to the centaur and told him to take it. He became worried and asked what she was up to. She couldn't just give him the antidote. She answered with a serious face that he took her for some kind of villain, but in fact, it was not she who poisoned him, but Hercules. Chiron remembered that he saw him on the battlefield, and Hajuin asked in surprise, "Is this his student?" Hydra came closer and shook the vial, saying that she had been waiting all this time for him to come for the antidote. After looking at her carefully, he finally decided to take the antidote, then uncorked the bottle and drank the contents. And as soon as the liquid spread throughout his body, he suddenly opened his eyes and felt something, and the bandages on his legs began to untie. His legs wobbled and he began to lose his balance, causing MC and Lucio to worry, after which he fell right at Hydra's feet. Hajuin trembled with fear and thought that she had done something to him and was about to ask about it, but suddenly Chiron's cry was heard, which made him shut up. He grabbed his leg and with tears in his eyes said that his legs returned to their previous state. 3,890 years. All this time he suffered pain in the world of constellations. Finally, he can put an end to this torment that lasted an eternity. Hydra sat down next to him and stroked his head, smiling, saying that he had to endure a lot. MC and Lucio immediately jumped up and ran towards him, shouting his name, and then returned to his hut in the forest. They sat on the floor and Hajuin asked why he still didn't come out. He hoped he wouldn't keep the shipping fee? The nymph got angry and exclaimed, "What nonsense is he talking about? How disparagingly he speaks of Chiron. It was Hydra who gave him the antidote. He can't claim the shipping fee." MC sighed in annoyance, and then the door opened and a centaur entered the room. He apologized and asked how long they had been waiting for him, then showed them the bow and said with a smile that he was looking for this thing, that's why he was late. Hajuin said that he had been gone longer than he thought. Lucio immediately covered his mouth and awkwardly replied that they had not expected anything at all. MC asked, was he talking about the bow? He confirmed his words and said that he was going to give this bow to Hercules, but he thought it would suit him better. He was upset and thought that it would be better if he gave him money, and then reached out for the weapon and said that no matter what, he would accept this one with gratitude. Suddenly the door to the house swung open and the silhouette of a god appeared on the threshold. Chiron did not recognize him and exclaimed, "Who is he?" Hajuin turned to the doorway with the same thought, and the stranger apologized for coming so suddenly. The nymph looked up at him in surprise and said that this is the god of war Ares. Ares said that he would tell the details later, and MC thoughtfully looked up at the ceiling and asked, "Is this that fool from Olympus?" Hearing him insult him, the nymph became very agitated and exclaimed, "Has he gone crazy? Ares is the son of Zeus and Hera, that is, a prince among the gods." Ares turned his attention to Hajuin and said that he was a man with a nymph. "Is he Li Hajuin?" He became agitated and confirmed his words, after which Ares suddenly rushed to him with the words that he found him, and he raised his hands in fear and thought, "What is going on?" Suddenly Ares knelt before him and bowed his head, asking him for help. That is how 27-year-old Hajuin turned out to be the first among people before whom a god knelt. After a while, the protagonist and the nymph were already riding a high-speed train. Looking out the window, she joyfully exclaimed that this car is so fast, and he said that it is a train, not a car. Let her be quieter, they are not alone here. She immediately closed her mouth and quietly replied that she understood, she will definitely follow the rules of behavior in a public place. He leaned back in his seat and sighed heavily, thinking that he hadn't been able to sleep a wink, and now there was another delivery. With this kind of lifestyle, he was going to die before his time. Suddenly, his phone made a notification sound and he checked it, seeing that he had received 100,000 points from Chiron for the delivery, and an additional amount. Now his account was at 388,700 points. He was very happy with this amount and laughed, exclaiming that his fatigue had immediately disappeared, and the man sitting behind him asked if he could be quieter. He became worried and apologized to him, and Lucio said with a smirk that he himself had told her to be quieter. He asked her to shut up and said that he was scared because the payment for the delivery took a long time to arrive. He wiped away the drool that appeared due to the realization of such a huge amount in his account, and thought that he had been paid 20 billion won for the delivery. Thanks to this he doesn't have to worry about bills or bankruptcy. He looked down at his task and thought that however he would be even calmer if this weren't the case. He needs to save a hunter under the patronage of Ares who is in danger. The remaining time to complete is 5 hours. Some time ago, when Ares told about his request, Lucio and Hajuin were very surprised. The god said that he looked at his thread of fate, and he will die today. MC exclaimed, "So if it is so urgent, maybe he himself will save him?" The nymph replied that this would violate the law of causality. He did not understand what this meant, and Chiron explained that a god cannot personally influence the life and death of a person. No god is allowed to violate this rule. He turned to Ares and said that the one who is called the god of war cannot not know this. Even if he is sad about it, he must accept it. He replied that this cannot be. He gritted his teeth and said that he had put everything he had on this hunter. The constellation could invest points in hunters. And if they performed feats, gaining fame through public recognition, the constellation would receive several hundred times more points than they had originally invested. But if the hunter completed his mission and died, he would lose everything. Hajuan asked with a gloomy expression, so he could lose everything he had invested? Chiron got angry and exclaimed that he was an idiot, and he deserved it. Even if it was a constellation, he was just sitting there playing like that. Ares looked away in shame and asked them to help at least once, then burst into tears and said that he had even secretly invested his father's points. MC wanted to ask if his father was Zeus by any chance, but the nymph interrupted him and exclaimed that he had invested the points of the greatest god of Olympus. Did he really steal Zeus's points? Remembering this, Hajuan put his hands behind his head and said that he can't solve all the problems around him. How does he think he should save the constellation hunter? He sighed and thought that if he fulfilled the request of a god like Ares and earned his favor, he would definitely get a huge tip for this task. Lucio asked where they were going. He showed her the ticket and said that they were going to Busan. Meanwhile, Yun One's guild was already fighting in the dungeon, and in the cave there were many corpses of all kinds of monsters. Xiangjun, covered in blood, shouted that they were still coming, let them prepare for battle. At that moment, several monsters jumped out of the darkness, which headed towards them with a loud roar. One of these monsters approached Xiangjun and he, sharply swinging his sword, chopped its head in two, and then began to deal with the rest. His eyes lit up and he used all his strength to swing his sword several times, cutting down all the monsters in the area. Then he stuck his sword into the ground and thought that they were cutting them, and there was no end to them. While he was resting, Erin dealt with the monsters behind him. Lunging forward, she attacked her opponents with dual daggers and easily cut their bodies, and as soon as their pieces fell to the ground, she allowed herself to stop. The guild leader turned to her and asked if she was okay, and she confirmed his words and said that she finished off those who were behind. After that, he turned to the rest of the guild and said that they all needed to rest for a while. Having settled down near the wall, they began to rest, and Xiangjun, breathing heavily, asked how much longer it was to go to the room with the boss. A guy named Han Ozen replied that they were already there, they would see him soon. Whatever, they were great. They came here twice as fast as the vanguard. Xiangjun replied that it was all because he led them well. He heard that 6 A-rank people from the vanguard were forced to retreat. Is the monster really that strong? Ozen replied that it was quite large, its size was approximately 10 meters. If they had fought the monster from the beginning, they would have been able to clear this gate, but the entire squad was exhausted due to fighting small creatures. He thinks it will be difficult for them, to say the least. Xiangjun replied that it was good that they were able to gather such a squad, after which the guy stood up and suggested that they continue. He wanted to quickly finish this and call his mother. Xiangjun agreed with him, and the whole team moved on and soon reached the door leading to the next room. The guild leader became wary and said that in front of them was the boss room, they should not be afraid of anything. The hunters answered with smiles on their faces that they understood him, and he, starting to open the doors, said that in that case, the tanks would enter first. After the doors opened, 4 hunters with shields stepped forward, but suddenly stopped, noticing that there was no one here. The others followed them, surprised by the absence of a monster, and Xiangjun asked if he was sure that this was the boss's room. Ozen confirmed his words and said that he checked everything, and Erin suddenly felt a few drops fall on her. She looked up and wondered why so much water was pouring from the ceiling. But as soon as she saw what was in the darkness, her eyes widened and she turned to the others, anxiously telling them to run. Right after that, something slimy fell from the ceiling on her, and Xiangjun called out to her worriedly. After that, exactly the same tentacles fell on several hunters, and Xiangjun asked Ozen, "What kind of creature is this?" They were not told about this at the briefing. But the guy, instead of answering, began to whisper unintelligible sounds, and then tentacles came out of his mouth, and he told his mother that he brought everyone. He was good, right? Hearing this, Xiangjun trembled and, looking up at the huge monster on the ceiling, realized that they were lured into a trap. At this time, MC finally arrived at the beach, and the nymph, looking at the gate, asked, "Is it here?" He asked in response, "Can't she see the gate?" Putting on his helmet, he flexed his fists and said that he would quickly save him and go to sleep, and then decided to go in there alone. Lucio indignantly exclaimed, "What is he saying? Why can't she go with him?" He asked her to calm down, and said that this gate is even bigger than the gate of Tartarus. She started waving her hands angrily and exclaimed that he was leaving her again, like last time, and he closed his eyes and thought that he hadn't felt so bad for a long time, but it was probably all because of yesterday. Last time, when she went with him, they met Hydra. He suddenly remembered something and, giving her the money, laughed at his genius and told her to buy her favorite candies with it and wait for him. She looked down at the banknote in her hands and then threw it in his face and exclaimed angrily, "Does he think you can buy it that easily? She also wants to enter the gate." He asked irritably, "Isn't it a bit small for that?" He took the banknote and smirked, saying that she was missing out on a lot. She could have bought 50 candies with that amount. As soon as she heard that, her anger immediately evaporated and drooled, and she asked in anticipation, "Is it that much?" He gave her the money back and said that he would be back soon as he walked towards the gate. If a strange uncle came to her and asked her to follow him, what should she tell him? She replied that she should tell him to go away, after which he said that was the right answer and laughed. He then walked through the gate and found himself inside the dungeon. He looked into the darkness with a confident gaze, then walked forward, lighting the way with a flashlight, and thought, "What kind of cave is this?" He accidentally stepped on a piece of monster meat, and feeling something slippery and soft under his feet, he screamed loudly in fear and asked, "What kind of abomination is this?" Having calmed down, he looked up and, seeing a pile of corpses in front of him, said that judging by these dead monsters, the hunter under the patronage of Ares clearly in trouble, but for good pay it is worth it. However, the road is littered with bodies. How is he supposed to get through? His suit is still on recharge, so he will have to somehow manage without it. If he had a moped, he would somehow cope with this. What should he do? This is just the beginning, and he is already in such a mess. The system told him that in an emergency he can use the local store. Walking into the store, he noticed a moped at the end of the list and smiled, then looked at the price of 100,000 points and pursed his lips, cursing quietly. This moped costs 1,000,000,000. He said that it was somehow too expensive for a mere mortal. Deciding to check what else useful was there, he did not notice how something slowly began to creep up on him from behind, and then suddenly a voice was heard next to his ear, asking what he was looking at so intently. He screamed loudly in fear and accidentally pressed the buy button, and Lucio behind him asked with a smile, was he scared? But Hajuin didn't care about her at all now. 100,000 points had just been deducted from his account, and his face darkened with horror. After that, he turned around abruptly and exclaimed, "What is she doing here?" She shrugged and replied that she said she wanted to go with him. She was following him from the very beginning. He asked, so she really followed him? He thought that she would calmly wait for him outside. A glow appeared behind him, and Lucio, noticing this, pointed her finger at it in fear and told him to turn around. He turned around and saw a new vehicle in front of him, after which he asked in surprise, "What is this, a moped?" He really liked the appearance of the moped and he thought that it was so cool, it was almost like a motorcycle. Suddenly, someone's roar was heard behind him. He turned around and Lucio exclaimed that there were monsters there. Realizing that he had completely forgotten himself, Hajuin sat on the moped and told her to hold on to it tighter, after which Lucio exclaimed, "Now she needs to shout. Forward, senior!" Turning the gas handle, he rushed forward and thought that the speed was simply awesome. Meanwhile, almost all of the guild members were trapped, and Xianjun was left alone with the monster. Gritting his teeth, he cursed quietly and asked how they were supposed to deal with this. Everyone was caught except him. He needed to save them as quickly as possible. At that moment, something fell on him from above, but he managed to jump to the side in time, after which he put all his effort and swung his sword several times, cutting the tentacles. Jumping back, he said that the monster did not even give him a chance to attack. The entire ceiling was the boss monster. It was just that they described it completely differently. He turned his gaze to Ozan and thought that besides, the association never said that there were monsters that could get into a person's body and control it. If the monster managed to get out, then a real disaster would happen. No matter what, he had to defeat this boss here and now. Erin, who was trapped at that time, began to move little by little, then her eyes lit up and she got out of the tentacle, cutting it into small pieces. As soon as she was outside, she caught her breath, and the monster's gaze was directed at her. Xianjun ran up to her and happily exclaimed that she was free, and then asked how she felt. Was everything okay? She replied that she wished she could say that it was, but that would be a lie. They needed to deal with the boss as quickly as possible. Otherwise, everyone who was captured by the tentacles would die. He agreed with her and they both looked at the monster, after which she rushed forward and said that she would distract him, and he should use it. Noticing that she was moving, the monster decided to attack and fired several tentacles at her, but she deftly dodged. Getting closer, she accelerated, after which she cut off one of the tentacles that was flying straight at her, and then glanced at Xianjun and thought that now was the moment. At this time, he got into a fighting stance, preparing to strike. He activated Ares' powers and his blade sparkled along with his eyes, after which he swung his sword from the bottom up, delivering a special attack called Mahar's Punisher. A powerful stream of energy rushed towards the monster and upon impact, it spread throughout the entire ceiling, after which it burst into flames, raising powerful streams of wind around. From such an attack, Xiangjun became very tired and dropped to one knee, leaning on his sword, and exclaimed that it was just in time. The divine skill, Mars Punisher, is the true reason why the Yun One Guild managed to maintain the lead until now. No monster has ever survived this attack, but this time was an exception. As soon as the dust cleared, Xiangjun saw a huge eye in front of him that was staring at him, and said that this can't be. Is he alive? Eren ran up to him and told him to get up quickly. She grabbed him by the shoulders and he, realizing that they wouldn't be able to defeat this monster, apologized to her and said that it seemed like the end. The huge eye looked at them intently and he, realizing what would happen next, thought that in the end he couldn't save them. But suddenly the monster's pupil became a strange shape and then a moped jumped out of there, breaking through the eye from the inside. MC, with a wide smile on his face, screamed and said that the delivery had arrived and Xiangjun and Eren looked at him in shock. With a loud roar of the engine, the moped flew forward and then landed and Hajuin, turning the steering wheel, turned his vehicle around and then stopped. Looking at the dust rising from the wheels, Eren asked in shock, "Is this person by any chance the guy on the moped?" The dust began to settle and Lucio, jumping to the ground, said that they were barbarians. They clearly had no talent for giving names. She is a super elite racer. When they saw a little girl in a rocker outfit, they froze in place, not believing their eyes, and she laughed and said that they were stupid. Why were they so numb when they saw her? She called out to Hajuin and told him to come here, he should see it too. They are such funny guys. But she did not notice how a monster-infected hunter approached her from behind, and when he greeted her, she almost died of fear. May the super elite racer rest in peace. But Hajuin came to the rescue in time. He grabbed the hunter by the hair and began to pull the tentacles out of his mouth, asking, "What is this? Is it a squid?" When he completely pulled out the monster, he shuddered in disgust and asked, "Was this creature sitting inside a person?" At this time, Ozen fell on Lucio and she cried in fear, and then suddenly a glow appeared on the ceiling. MC decided to check what was going on, and when he came across a huge torn eye of a monster, he cursed in his mind and exclaimed, "What the hell is this? Is this the boss of this gate? It looks like they really are on time." He turned around and called out to Xiangjun, and he asked, "What is this?" Hajuin asked, "He is a hunter under the patronage of Ares, right?" He confirmed his words and wanted to say something else, but MC did not listen to him and began to examine him from all sides, saying that he did not look well. "He is not injured, right?" He replied that there are only a couple of scratches, but MC again did not let him finish and said that for some reason he seems familiar to him. Have they met somewhere before? Xiangjun's face darkened and Hajuin suddenly remembered that they met in Tartarus, after which he laughed and said that the world is so small. Xiangjun nervously closed his eyes, then pointed his finger up and loudly told him to stop chatting. First he must defeat the monster. If he doesn't deal with him as soon as possible, other people might be in danger. MC asked, "But why him?" This question caught Xiangjun off guard and he spread his arms out to the sides and said that monsters should be caught by hunters. What can an ordinary delivery guy like him do? Especially since his suit is still on recharge. Eren at this time took out her daggers and said that she thinks he decided to sacrifice them. She got into a fighting stance and he, stretching out his hand towards her, said that it was not like that at all. He tried to say that it was not he who should fight the monster, but Xiangjun. He asked in response, "What kind of nonsense is this? His weapon is broken, and at least he has a moped." MC took out his phone and with a smile on his face told him not to worry about the weapon, he had a delivery for it. The system asked if he wanted to hand over the weapon of the god of war. He confirmed it, and suddenly a bright flash appeared between them, which blinded the members of the Yun One Guild, and when Xiangjun saw what was in this flash, he was surprised. A two-handed sword appeared in front of him, which he immediately recognized. This is the great sword of Ares, which existed only in myths ending the war. After that, Hajuin went to his moped and said that he had handed over the goods, so he was saying goodbye to them, and the head of the guild excitedly asked him to wait. Who sent him this sword? And why is he walking around the dungeon so calmly, although he is not even a hunter? Who is he anyway? MC picked up the tearful Lucio in his arms and turning to him, said with a smile that if he wanted to know his name, then he should just call him the delivery man of the gods. Having said goodbye to them finally, he got on a moped and left, and Xianjun asked him to wait, after which he said in bewilderment that he was talking some nonsense. The monster at this time roared loudly, attracting attention, and Xianjun, realizing that he had no choice but to use this sword, grabbed the handle and bright sparks began to emanate from it, which grew into a beam of light that rushed straight to the ceiling. Xianjun screamed loudly. His body at this time began to be covered in armor, and his eyes opened wide. The constellation Aries awakened for the second time, and Xianjun took possession of the power of his patron. Looking at the head of the guild, Eren was very surprised and thought that this was incredible power. What happened to him? The monster at this time began to emit sparks, but Xianjun confidently stood in front of him, not doubting his abilities at all. Eren thought that it seemed that they would not lose this fight, and the guild leader meanwhile raised his sword and swung, after which he activated the powers of Ares, which is why his sword was enveloped in powerful streams of flame. With a loud cry, swinging it, he directed a stream of energy at the enemy, and at that time he shot an energy beam. When their forces collided, an explosion occurred, but Ares's forces turned out to be much stronger, and the energy flow easily overcame the monster's beam, approaching his eye. When the energy flow was very close, it began to burn the monster under his deafening screech. After that, several bright flashes from cuts appeared on the ceiling, and then a powerful explosion occurred. Despite this, Xianjun continued to stand still, and a powerful gust of wind hit Eren in the face, and after a few seconds, when everything became quiet, she looked up and said that this couldn't be. He was able to break through the ceiling of the cave. The sun's rays fell on Xianjun, after which his armor crumbled and he, having lost all his strength, fell unconscious. But Eren caught him in time and sympathetically said that he did a great job. She confidently looked up at the ceiling and thought, who was that guy on the moped? More precisely, the delivery man of the gods. Hajiun at this time was already outside the dungeon and was riding home. At one point, he sighed heavily and said that he was hungry. Maybe they should get a snack? Time passed. The news anchor reported that the gates to Hyundai, in the city of Busan, were opened yesterday afternoon. Now they were informed that the gates were finally closed. The breakthrough of the dungeon was stopped by the best guild in the country, the Yunwon Guild. Xianjun, who was recovering in the hospital, looked at his tablet and said that all day there was nothing but news about the gate. He remembered the guy on the moped and thought that if it weren't for the god delivery man, they wouldn't have been able to stop the dungeon breakthrough. He looked at his sword and thought, who the hell is this person? But he was able to deliver the sword to him, right? At that very moment, Doan ran down the hallway. Looking into the ward, he called out to the leader with tears in his eyes and asked, was he that badly injured? But seeing that he was completely fine, he let out a dissatisfied sigh, and Xianjun said that he seemed disappointed. He replied that he was not, he was very happy. A smile immediately appeared on his face, and he said that he heard that he did a great job this time too. Their leader is the best. After all, not everyone can take third place in the hunter rankings. He looked to the side and asked, what kind of sword is this? Where did his previous weapon go? He replied that it was broken. Dolan was very surprised by this news and exclaimed that that sword was worth more than 10 billion won. The guild leader said that it doesn't matter, instead of it he now has this sword. He asked, is this sword so good? Xianjun replied that the guy on the moped gave him this sword. Hearing this, Dolan was very surprised and started drooling, frantically asking, did the guy on the moped enter the Hyundai gate? The guild leader asked him to be quiet and he apologized, and he said that anyway, it's good that he is here. He has a request. He asked what kind of request it was, and Xianjun replied that he found out who the guy on the moped was. He wants him to find where he lives. Doan asked puzzledly, why does he need his address? Xianjun smiled and replied that they need to recruit him into their guild at all costs. Meanwhile, Ares is in the temple. Noticing the delivery man at the door, the god of war happily went down to him and asked if he managed to deliver his sword. He confirmed his words and said that he delivered it safe and sound, so he shouldn't worry. Ares sighed with relief and said that it was not for nothing that he entrusted him with this matter. He smiled and told him to go to the temple. It's time to find something to give him in return. He headed to his home, and Hajiun looked after him with a smile and said that everyone said that he was rude, but he did not agree with that. Lucio exclaimed that of course he was polite, he was a prince. Let him not call him rude, it was blasphemy. MC followed the god and thought that he really was a prince. As he moved through the temple, he looked around with interest, but suddenly Ares stopped and called out to the nymph. She asked excitedly what was the matter, and he ordered her to wait for them here. Only Hajuin could go with him further. She was upset, and MC went further and waved his hand at her with a grin, after which they entered the treasury. Finding himself in front of the entrance to the room, he raised his head in surprise and said that there were such huge doors. The god of war said that by human standards, each door weighed more than 3 tons. He asked, "How can this be opened?" Ares replied that he asked a stupid question, after which he came closer and said that the doors just need to be pushed. After these words, he did it, and Hajuin with a stupid smile said that everything turned out to be so simple. They found themselves in a hall filled with all sorts of jewelry and gold, and Ares greeted him in the treasury. Seeing a lot of riches, MC was delighted, and the god said that everything that was here was the jewelry of the legitimate heir to Olympus, the god of war Ares. Among the many treasures, Hajuin noticed a golden armor and a bejeweled sword. His eyes widened in delight, and he asked how much all of this was worth. He could take anything he wanted? Ares asked him in return how he could pay him with just one thing. It would be bad for his reputation. MC became very happy and said that he believed in him. After that, Ares sat down next to a pile of gold and started looking for something, saying that he was sure he had left it somewhere here. Once he found the thing he was looking for, he handed Hajuin a golden box and told him to open it. He took it and asked what was in it, and he replied that he himself did not know. He asked if he was really giving him something he did not know what. The god laughed and told him not to worry about it. He did not open it because it was too expensive even for him. He smirked and said that what was inside could not be something bad. When his father personally handed him the box, he said that it was one of the most precious treasures to him. So he himself was curious about what it was. MC opened the box and he asked if he liked it. He pursed his lips in disappointment, and with feigned delight replied that it was so cool, and Ares said that he knew he would like it. He suddenly realized with what intonation he said this, and when Hajuin pulled out a club from the box, he exclaimed in confusion that this could not be. MC asked, "He must be joking? And this is what he calls a treasure? It's just an ordinary club." Meanwhile, somewhere at sea, a lonely ship was sailing in a storm. The great traveler Jason came to the edge of the deck and said that the situation was too serious. During the voyage, they encountered the sirens. The mermaids sitting on the rocks began to play the harp, and Jason wondered if he should trust a man with this mission. Hajuin at this time began to swing his club furiously, almost touching Ares, and shouted, "Did he reward the god's delivery man with this?" A new day had come. MC got out of bed and sighed loudly, stretching. He stretched his shoulders and, feeling pain in his back, said that it seemed like he had slept too long. After meeting Ares, he returned home late. Lucio, who was sleeping on the floor, asked for some candy in her sleep, after which he sat down next to her and asked if nymphs also talk in their sleep. He covered her with a blanket thinking that she must be very tired, after which he told her to wait a little. Once they moved in, she would be able to sleep in the bed. After that, he decided to go to the store and bought some groceries worth 2,401. He asked the checkout for a bag and said goodbye to the clerk, after which he headed for the exit. But along the way he noticed a poster on the wall advertising the national exam for hunters that would be held on the 15th. There were still 3 days left until that time. After leaving the store, he thought that he hadn't really wanted to become a hunter before, but he couldn't continue to infiltrate the dungeon while hiding his identity. Maybe he should try becoming a hunter? When he returned home, Lucio had already woken up. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she asked where he had gone. He showed her the bags and said with a smile that he bought them something to eat. She immediately started checking what he bought there, and was upset when she didn't see any candy inside. He said that all her teeth would fall out soon, and at that moment his phone made a notification sound, informing about a new delivery request. He took out his phone and seeing that an order had come in from Hephaestus, he thought with a smile, did he want to drink with him again? Soon after, he found himself in Hephaestus's abode and happily greeted him, and he said that he had arrived quickly today. He replied that of course, he had arrived faster, after all, he was his regular customer. Hephaestus said with a smile that a lot of people had been turning to him lately. He heard that he had helped cure Chiron's leg and dealt with Ares' problem. He wondered if the news had really spread that quickly already? Only a couple of days had passed since then. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly and said that he was just lucky, after which he asked what he could help him with today. Hephaestus noticed someone approaching him from behind and turned around, smiling and saying that he was already here. Hajuin wondered who it was, and Lucio hid behind him and screamed loudly that it was him. He asked, "Do they know each other?" She asked in response, "Does he not know him?" He has the fastest and safest shipping by sea, the leading sales transport company Olympus. This is Jason, the leader of the Argonauts. He asked, how does he know him? Jason said that he is known not only as an Argonaut, but also as an outstanding traveler. The greatest people of ancient Greece took part in the campaign on the ship Argo and were called the heroes of Hellas. Jason turned to MC with a smile and said that he had heard a lot about him. He healed his adoptive father, and he was grateful to him for that. He replied that he should not thank him. After all, he was paid for his work. Jason said that the rumors were true after all. He was a very modest person. He was sorry, but he didn't have much time right now. Could he get straight to the point? He agreed, and he said that there was a small problem with his service. They couldn't do cargo transportation because of the sirens that they encountered along the way. Ha-Jun thought that their name was similar to Argo, sea transportation. Jason continued by saying that in the past, when they had problems with them, he asked Orpheus to deal with it, but now it was impossible since he was on a concert tour. After everything he heard about him, he decided to immediately turn to him for help. MC thoughtfully asked what was so special about him. Was he really asking him to get rid of the sirens now? Jason confirmed his words and said that he had noticed correctly, and Ha-Jun was upset to think why an ordinary courier was asked to deal with all sorts of monsters. He apologized to him and said that he didn't know what they were saying about him, but he was not someone who knew how to fight. The great traveler hit the inside of his palm with his fist and asked with a smile if maybe he could make a final decision after he learned about the reward. He was sure it would not disappoint him. A system window appeared in front of Ha-Jun, informing him that he would receive 500,000 points for completing this task. He was very surprised by this amount, after which he said with a sly smile that although he did not know how to fight, he already liked it more than delivering food. He thought that the reward was too good to refuse, and Hephaestus meanwhile said that sirens do live in the sea. It would not be easy for him to fight them in the water. Hearing this, MC was very surprised and asked, so they live in the sea? Lucio replied that they definitely do not live in fire, after which Hephaestus told him not to worry, it was time for him to show what he was capable of. After that, they set off on a ship and soon arrived at the habitat of the sirens, the Singing Rocks. Jason said that cargo ships are forced to sail only along this route. Ha-Jun with a confident smile told him not to worry, he will deal with the sirens. The great traveler laughed and said that he wanted to ask him to destroy them before dawn tomorrow. He would give him a boat on which he can swim to those rocks. He replied that this is not necessary, causing Jason to be surprised, after which he jumped off the ship and told Lucio to follow him. Seeing this, the great traveler was very surprised and exclaimed, "What is he going to do?" MC at this time used a summoning and a moped appeared under him, on which he immediately sat down, after which he rode it on the water. Also on his head appeared an invisibility helmet, but already an improved version for fighting at sea. It allows you to walk or run on water for a limited period of time. The use time is 5 minutes. Happy with the new helmet, he thanked Hephaestus and rode on, and Jason looked after them and said that he is such an unpredictable person. Meanwhile, Ha-Jun asked, so these rocks are where the monster settlement is? The nymph looked at him seriously, and said that she would ask just in case. He knew what the sirens were, right? He asked, they were singing mermaids, right? She sighed in relief and said that it was good that he knew the basics. But if the sirens were just ordinary mermaids who sang well, could Odysseus, the war hero, have escaped them by simply covering his ears? The sirens were experts in underwater attacks. A few of them could even turn the great sea monster Kraken into a snack. After her words, MC understood why the reward for the quest was so big and said that they weren't going to them empty-handed. He reached behind his back and pulled out a club, saying that they would deal with these insidious monsters using rustic methods. Meanwhile, the mermaids sitting on the rocks noticed someone approaching them, and one of them said that there was one person and one nymph ahead, and they would be here soon. Another mermaid said that she would deal with them, after which she jumped into the water and began to sneak up on them unnoticed. Soon she got very close and Lucio, seeing a shadow under the water, warned that something was approaching them, and he replied that he felt it too. At that moment a siren jumped out of the water, and he took out a club and hit her on the head with all his might, sending her back under the water. He remembered Ares saying that even though this club looked flimsy, it was a gift from his father. Surely this club is not as simple as it seems. After that, he told the mermaid with a smile to taste the destructive power of the Olympus club of 99 units of damage, but unexpectedly for him the mermaid surfaced and touched her head in bewilderment, asking what kind of stupid stick was this. Ha-Jun remained silent, and then his face distorted with horror, and he, mentally cursing the god of war, thought what kind of firewood he slipped him. After a while, the mermaids started looking for them. One of them asked where they went. They disappeared so suddenly. Her friend said that they couldn't have gone far, so they should keep looking. Meanwhile, Lucio peeked out from behind the stone, and MC said that they almost got into serious trouble. They only survived thanks to the invisibility helmet. What's the situation there? Lucio said that they swam far away, and he asked if they should try to enter then. They looked at the huge temple in front of them, which was considered their base, and remembered Jason saying that there was a siren queen in the temple of the sea. It would be great if he could get rid of the beast. Her death would be a big blow to the sirens. Lucio asked if they could definitely enter now. After all, the club given to them by the god of war turned out to be useless. Ha-Jun thought that she was right. It would be better to take at least the stone with them, and that would be more useful. However, there was another way. He opened a store and said that there is no problem in this world that money cannot solve. The system recommended him the Zeus lightning bolt for 150,000 points, and he immediately bought it. A sparkling cloud appeared above them, and Lucio exclaimed in surprise that it was Zeus's ball lightning. This time, MC was not at all upset about losing 150,000 points, because for this task he would earn 1.5 billion won. Meanwhile, the sirens gathered inside the temple and they turned to their queen, asking her to go hunting, because they had been without food for 10 days. She refused her request with a gloomy expression and said that Orpheus, who had recently ruined their hunt, had left. Such an opportunity may not come again. If they attack everyone in a row, then people will stop going to sea for some time. Therefore, they need to hunt a large ship right away. They need to wait a little longer, soon. Agro sea transportation will pass here with a lot of people. At that very moment, Ha-Jun was also present in the hall, but under the effect of invisibility. He said that she was talking about such cruel things so easily. Lucio said worriedly that they wanted to eat the entire team, and he confidently said that they would not let that happen. Suddenly, he called out to her and asked if she remembered the jjajangmyeon they ate last time. Her mouth immediately started to water, and she remembered that it tasted so magical, after which he said that if she helped him this time, he would buy her jjajang spaghetti, which was even more delicious. She was very surprised and exclaimed, "Is such a dish really possible?" He asked if she agreed to it, and she confirmed his words with a confident expression. After that, he whispered the plan in her ear and she asked in surprise, "Will this really work?" It will be very dangerous for him. He took off his helmet and put it on her, saying that this is why she will do everything. He believes in her. She said his name in confusion, after which she flew high and shouted that she can do it. He looked after her and thought that the effect of the helmet only extended to those who were nearby. Now they could see him. To attract their attention, he loudly called out to the mermaids like stupid fish, and they immediately turned around, asking in surprise how a man could enter the temple. He turned his back on them and slapped himself on the butt, saying that if they wanted to taste him, they should catch up. The queen of the sirens clenched her teeth in rage, and then loudly ordered her subjects to grab him, and they swam towards him, showing their sharp teeth. At that moment, he ran to the exit and the system reported that without the helmet, the ability to walk on water would soon disappear. After that, he immediately called out to Lucio, and she, raising a ball lightning above herself, said that she was ready. Having cast a spell, she ordered the lightning of Zeus to hit them, and while it was collecting energy, it flew away. Zeus's lightning activated and the entire temple was illuminated by a bright flash, after which a powerful explosion occurred. MC, who managed to run out of the temple, felt the heat behind his back and shouted that it was more powerful than he thought. The sirens that remained in the temple screamed loudly, and then the building collapsed, crushing them with rubble. Looking at the destroyed temple, Ha-Jun thought that the original goal was only to kill the queen, but cutting down the weeds would also help the sailors. Having fallen on the rubble, Lucio happily said that they succeeded, and he said that she did a good job. But they got rid of the queen, so why is there still no reward? At that moment, someone's hand suddenly crawled out from under the rubble, which grabbed the nymph by the leg, which made her scream loudly in fear. The queen of the sirens crawled out from under the rubble and asked how dare they? After that, her face distorted with rage and she screamed that now they won't be able to take a breath. MC was very scared for Lucio, and seeing that the siren queen was going to devour her, he suddenly took off and his motor suit entered the second phase, activating the power mode. Ha-Jun rushed towards the siren queen with a loud scream and she noticed it, but it was too late. He dealt a powerful blow to her face and told her to get away from Lucio, which caused the mermaid to be thrown to the side and she splashed on the surface of the water several times. MC caught his breath and thought that this is how strong the second phase is. He didn't expect the strength to be so great. He clenched his hand into a fist and looked at it in confusion, and Lucio exclaimed that there is no time to stare at the suit, she does not see the queen. At that very moment, the water near the wreckage they were standing on began to bubble and the nymph, noticing this, warned her friend of the danger, but it was too late. The Siren Queen jumped out from under the water, causing him to be surprised, after which she grabbed his leg and said with a smile that he was caught. Hajuan looked at her in shock, and then the Siren Queen dived under the water with him and Lucio called out to him in concern, while the mermaid dragged him to the very bottom. She grabbed him by the neck and said with a loud laugh that she would drown him, and he began to blow bubbles from his mouth and realized that he was suffocating. Is he really going to die here? He just recently signed a contract to buy an apartment, and he has so many points on his balance. He can't die like this, without even starting to live. He stretched his hand out to the side and used the baton summoning and grabbed it, and the system reported that the baton was responding to power. 100% power output. After that, he swung his sword at the Siren Queen's head and jumped back, and she exclaimed that he hit her right on the bone. He called her a stupid creature and began to strike her head many times, and in the end, a bright flash appeared at the scene of the battle, which soon appeared on the surface of the water. Lucio froze in surprise, watching this, and then excitedly called out to Hajuan and he jumped out from under the water, shouting that justice had prevailed. That's how he destroyed the last siren. After completing the task, they returned to land and went to a restaurant to have a snack. As Hajuan promised, he ordered Lucio jajang spaghetti and she, having tried it, said that it was so delicious. He smiled and said that's what he was talking about, let her keep eating. Maybe she wants something else? It's all on him today. She got really happy and told him to be ready to order, and he thought that what he didn't expect was that thanks to Lucio's help, they would be able to defeat the sirens. But of course, he contributed more to destroying the Siren Queen. Even though he almost died. He took out his phone and smiled and told her to eat as much as she could, she deserved it. When he checked his balance, he saw 633,700 points, and thought that she had helped him earn 500,000 points. If he exchanged it for money, it would be 6.337 billion won. The waiter put a plate of tansuyak on the table and Hajuan, starting to eat, thought that he could even buy the Zeus ball lightning for 150,000 points. Of course, he got paid more for destroying the monster than for a regular delivery. This thought made him remember the poster about the national exam for hunters, and Lucio, noticing that he was lost in thought, asked what it was. He replied that he just tried some sweet and sour pork and she, taking a piece from his plate, said that she would eat it all. He pointed at the plate with sauce with displeasure and said that this dish should be eaten with this. She dipped a piece of pork in the sauce, then tried it, and said with delight that it was incredibly sour, but at the same time there was a sweet taste of crispy fried pieces of pork. How delicious it was! He smiled and said that no one was taking her food away, so she should eat it slowly. She tried a few more pieces of pork, then took the plate with sauce and asked why he was making things so complicated if the sauce could just be poured on top. She was about to do so, but he suddenly hit her on the head and told her to forget about it. He didn't think she was capable of such a nasty thing. After that, they returned home and fell apart on the floor, and MC said that he was going to die. Lucio, stroking her rounded belly, agreed with him, and he replied that it was obvious, she ate the entire tansuyak by herself. He closed his eyes and thought that yesterday, the day before yesterday, and the day before that, he worked like a horse. So today he can comfortably rest at home. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door, and he opened his eyes, angrily exclaiming, "Who else is there? He is not even allowed to rest." He got up and headed for the door thinking that no one comes at such a time. Maybe the landlord came to inspect the room? He opened the door slightly and asked why they came to him, but before he could finish speaking, a stranger in a mask and sunglasses asked, "Is he Lee Hajuan?" Seeing a suspicious guy in front of him, he became very agitated, after which he closed the door and said that he will not buy anything. The stranger continued to knock on the door, calling him, and he said with displeasure that in their day, these idiots even managed to find out people's names. Lucio carefully peeked out from around the corner and asked who was there. He replied that he did not know, some kind of merchant. The stranger, who turned out to be Xianjun, lowered the mask from his face and exclaimed that he came here because he knows everything about him. He is, after all, a delivery man for the gods. Hearing this, MC was very surprised, after which he rushed to the door and revealed it, asking who he was. Seonjin, who had already pulled out his sword, said with a smile that he had finally opened the door for him, and he was about to break it down. Seeing this, Hajun thought he was crazy. What kind of psychopath was this? He finally recognized him and asked in surprise, what was he doing here? Seonjin hid the sword and asked in response, what did he think, after everything that happened? He came to invite him to the Yunwon Guild. After that, they moved to a cafe to discuss all the conditions. Seonjin reached into his inside pocket and said that before they moved on to the main thing, here is the reward for his help. It's not much, but let him accept it. He put an envelope on the table and MC, opening it, took out a check for 500 million won, after which he rubbed his nose contentedly and asked, people are supposed to help each other in dangerous situations, right? He thought that he should have started with this right away, and Seonjin said with a smile that he was glad that he liked the reward. Now they need to discuss joining the guild. If he joins them, he will get 20 billion won immediately for signing the contract and another 30 billion won as an annual payment. There are also bonuses for effective work. This amount really surprised Hajun, and the guild leader asked what he thought about it. He thought that there is no guild in the industry with better conditions than theirs, and there will never be. When Dun was discharged from the hospital, he said that this guy did not even have a hunter's license and any work experience. So how was he able to go so deep into the dungeon of Tartarus and kill a monster? At the same time, he does not know whether he entered the gate of Hyundai or already came out. But if he joins them, in the future they will earn even more money with his help than he is offering him now. MC asked what will happen if he refuses. Seonjin laughed in response, and said that he knew that he could be relied on. Then now he is inviting him to join the guild. He stopped mid-sentence, suddenly realizing what he said and confusedly asked him to repeat it, and he looked at the phone screen with a smile and said that he doesn't want to sign the contract. He walked out of the cafe with Lucio, and Seonjin followed him, asking him not to refuse and to think about it again. If he doesn't like the terms, he can reconsider it. He replied that this was his final decision. He wasn't interested in guilds or anything like that. He still had things to do, so he needed to go. Seonjin ran after him and confusedly exclaimed, what other things? Is there anything more important than this? Hajun turned to him with a smile and, showing a notification on the screen that he received a new order, said with a smile that he actually had more important things to do. After that, he clicked on the notification and a bright light appeared around him, which blinded Seonjin for a moment, and he thought, is this the same light he saw in the gate? As soon as the flash faded, he saw that it had disappeared, and froze in surprise. Meanwhile, MC was in the middle of the mountains. Lucio asked, didn't he say that they were going to rest today? He nervously replied that she was right, after which he exclaimed in rage, who ordered delivery to the top of the mountain in the first place? Usually, he appeared right in front of the customer, so why was he teleported to the foot of such a high mountain today? Lucio said that he always responded to any order. Maybe that's the case? He said that this time he just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. He didn't expect Seonjin from Yunwon to personally show up to him, and also with an offer to join the guild. Of course, this is a very tempting offer, but people would immediately understand that he is not a hunter endowed with divine power, but uses items from his part-time job. And why does he need this guild if he gets billions for each delivery? He climbed higher and the system reported that they had reached their destination. He was very tired and caught his breath and said that he wanted to see this idiot who had called him to such a place. Suddenly his eyes widened when he saw a pile of monster corpses in front of him, and he exclaimed, what the hell is that? Lucio shuddered at his screams and asked what he was so scared of. Seeing the monsters, she exclaimed, what the hell is that? He replied that he didn't know, he had also just arrived here. He stepped on one of the corpses and thought it was strange, but this thing had a very familiar texture. Could this be the same monster that was in the Hyundai Gate? He turned to Lucio and asked, are these creatures also from Greek myths? She replied that she had never heard of such monsters. She wanted to say something else, but suddenly the ground under their feet began to shake and one of the monsters appeared behind Hajun. He turned around in horror and thought, so this creature was alive? At that very moment, a stranger appeared out of nowhere. He jumped high and, aiming at the monster, with a loud scream clenched his hand into a fist and headed towards the enemy, after which he knocked it to the ground with a crash. Covering himself from the emerging wind, MC asked, what is this? The man sighed heavily because of the pain in his back and said that the years were taking their toll. His body is not what it used to be. He turned his gaze to Hajuin and walked up to him with a smile, saying that it was him, the hero from the rumors. MC raised his head and thought that he was so big. Was it he who ordered the delivery? Lucio recognized him and exclaimed that it was him. Hajuin asked who it was, and she exclaimed, he himself cannot understand? He completed the 12 tasks of the gods, the great hero of Olympus, who then ascended the throne and brought victory in the war of the gods with the Titans. He is the hero of all heroes, Hercules. Hercules smiled and said that he felt a little awkward from being reminded of his past exploits. MC was shocked at this time. He thought, so this man is the one who shot a poisoned arrow at Chiron? Hercules said that he heard the news. He healed his teacher, right? He nervously replied that it was actually Hydra. But Hercules did not let him finish and gave him a friendly slap on the back, thanking him for his help. The system reported that the suit could not withstand such damage, and Hajuin thought he was crazy. He just had incredible strength. After that, Hercules with a wide smile on his face pointed at himself and said that in any case, he will introduce himself again. His name is Hercules. He used to be a demigod, but as the nymph said, he became a constellation protecting Olympus. Rubbing his bruised back, Hajuin said his name with tears in his eyes, and so did the joyful Lucio, adding that it was a great honor to meet him. Hercules crossed his arms over his chest and said that he didn't call him here for nothing. He wants him to find out something for him. MC asked what was going on, and Hercules turned around and pointed his finger towards the cave, saying that this passage appeared because of the Titans. It was used by monsters trying to invade Olympus. Lately, monsters with tentacles have been getting here through this hole very often. Every time he sees these unknown creatures, it seems to him that someone from the outside is trying to invade here. The monster that was lying in front of his feet and was still alive let out a long sigh, and he immediately crushed it with his foot, and Hajuin thought, could this somehow be connected with the appearance of the Hyundai Gate? Hercules turned to him and said with a serious face that he needed to know where all these creatures came from. The system reported a new task. He needed to find out the reason for the appearance of monsters on Mount Olympus. He was given 24 hours to complete it. If he failed the task or refused, he would suffer heavenly punishment. The reward for delivery was 200,000 points. Gritting his teeth nervously, MC thought, is this the kind of problem he should solve now? Even if it costs him 200,000 points, he should refuse the task. He glanced at Hercules' powerful body and doubted, then bowed to him and said that he would immediately go on reconnaissance. He thought that he was an ordinary courier. Of course, he decided to give up as soon as he set foot on Olympus. Hercules laughed contentedly and said that he liked his attitude anyway, just as his wife Hebe said. Hearing the familiar name, Hajuin suddenly remembered that this was the goddess from whom he received his first delivery order, and was very surprised to realize that she was his wife. Hercules said that she always tells him how sorry she is that she underestimated him. He laughed and said that it is nothing to worry about, it happens to everyone. Let him tell her that everything is okay. He thought it was amazing how all the heroes of Greek myths appeared here. The system reported that the route was built and MC, looking at the map, said that something seemed wrong. Lucio asked what was wrong. He replied that the map said that he needed to go in this direction. He went to the very edge of the cliff and Hercules confirmed his words, saying that he would have to send it there. Hearing this, Hajuin was very surprised, and then Hercules picked him up and took aim, saying that he would launch him into the depths with his own hands at great speed. MC asked him to wait, after which Hercules threw him out and wished him a safe journey, and he was shocked and thought that he was a crazy idiot. Meanwhile, in the Yun 1 Guild building, Doyon rushed down the hall and ran into the guild leader's office, calling out loudly to him, and he asked with displeasure, is the leader's office a playground for him or something? He ignored his displeasure and asked excitedly, did he sign the contract? Seongjin waved his hand and told him to forget about it. He turned out to be a heartless person. He asked, but why? He had done so much. The guild leader replied that it wasn't him. He suddenly received a delivery order. He said that he had to get to work. Doyon sighed heavily and asked, did he really go on a delivery? Wasn't that a typical excuse? Seongjin thought about it and replied that he didn't know, it didn't look like it. After all, he came to deliver to him in the Hyundai dungeon, and then he received a message from Ares himself, because that was exactly the thing he asked for. Whatever the case, they will continue to look for new hunters for the guild. Let him tell you what's going on with his errand. He thought that this sacred relic that Ares had given to him through Hajuin had been his spare sword for a while, but since he no longer needed it, he put it up for auction. He also needed money to pay for signing the contract, but he still couldn't persuade the courier to join the guild. Doyun suddenly interrupted his thoughts and asked if he hadn't received the message. They had a buyer. He heard that he was from Japan. The leader became interested and said that this meant they would go ahead with the original plan. He thought that recently, there had been a problem with serial thefts in interguild trade. During the transportation of inventory, especially valuable items were stolen. And this sword can't be bought for a few won, it would be better to involve mercenaries in the transportation. He suddenly remembered that Hajuin had called himself a delivery man, and he said with a smile that he had a great idea. Meanwhile, MC was falling into the abyss and screaming, saying, couldn't they have done it differently? The system informed that in a few moments, he would reach his destination. He was surprised and thought, the destination is what awaits him at the bottom of this cliff. If he keeps falling like this, he will just be smashed into a pancake. He summoned his moped and deftly climbed onto it together with the nymph, after which he continued to fall and soon landed with a crash at the very bottom. Dust rose from the impact. Hajuin sighed and said in surprise that this all-terrain vehicle was worth the money. They survived only thanks to the moped. He called out to the nymph and said that everything was fine, so let her get up. She sighed heavily with tears in her eyes and said that she thought they would definitely die. After that they got off the moped and he looked around, wondering what they were supposed to find out from these bare rocks. And how were they supposed to get back up? Lucio asked, don't they just need to tell Hercules something? MC told him to go to hell and exclaimed that this crazy idiot threw him off the cliff. Suddenly, someone's loud footstep was heard behind him, which caused trembling. Feeling this, Lucio hugged Hajuin's leg in fear, and he exclaimed, what is this? She said that the ground was shaking violently. He thought that maybe there was a monster that could not be seen from the top. So they will die and no one will even know about it. Suddenly, someone's voice was heard asking, were they just talking about Hercules? Hearing this, MC turned around in fear and saw in front of him a giant holding a huge stone ball on his back. It was Atlas. Hajuin became very nervous and thought that he was almost as tall as Mount Wagwan. Atlas asked displeasedly, how is he related to Hercules? He laughed nervously and replied that he was not related to him in any way. He simply asked to find out how monsters get out of here. He said that he could find out here. Hearing about monsters, Atlas laughed loudly, which made the ball on his back glow, after which he asked how the difficulties arose, so this kid decided to look for him. Because of the light, MC finally saw that he was holding a giant ball above himself, and the giant laughed and said that he should be ashamed. After his words, Hajuin thought that it was obvious that he could answer Hercules' question. He smiled crookedly and asked if he could tell him what he knew. Atlas asked discontentedly, why would he help solve this sucker's problem? MC was surprised by his stubbornness and turned to the nymph, asking why he answered like that. She hid behind his back out of fear and asked if he really didn't know. Atlas lost the War of the Gods and Titans. As punishment, he was forced to hold the firmament on his shoulders. It's obvious that he's feuding with Hercules, the son of Zeus, isn't it? Hajuin was very surprised by this news and thought, why couldn't he warn him about this? Why are all the gods such hopeless idiots? Atlas asked, are they done chatting? Hajuin looked up at him and laughed awkwardly, asking, so he heard everything? The giant said that the nymph told the truth. Even if monsters get into the outside world, it has nothing to do with him. MC was starting to get annoyed and thought that if he couldn't convince the giant, he wouldn't be able to make the delivery and heavenly punishment would await him. He made a cute face and asked, why is he doing this? How can he refuse a cutie like him? Atlas told him to stop or he'll throw up. MC sighed heavily, then said that he wasn't asking for information for free, he would definitely repay for the help. Maybe he wanted him to fulfill some request of his? Hearing this, the giant was slightly surprised, and Lucio exclaimed that he was crazy. He asked in response, what else can he do? After his words, the giant laughed and asked, does he think he will trust such a matter to an ordinary person? He smiled in response and asked, why not? Atlas agreed and said that he was quite brave for a man. In that case, let him go on a journey and bring him a golden apple. If he gets it without crossing the river Styx, he will tell him what to do with the monsters. Hajuin thought that this sounded somehow familiar, and the nymph exclaimed in alarm that it was impossible, he must not agree. Golden apples are a real treasure. They grow on the tree that Gaia gave Hera as a wedding gift. Remembering where he had seen golden apples, he closed her mouth and asked with a smile, will this really be enough? Atlas laughed and confirmed his words,